Welcome to the History Lab Explainer. Grab a seat because today we're literally ripping up the old history textbooks. For decades, we've been handed this carved-in-stone version of the human story. But what happens when modern science, things like DNA sequencing, X-ray spectrometers, you name it, enters the chat? Well, it turns out modern archaeology has proven a massive chunk of what we thought we knew is just completely wrong. We're treating today's explainer as a full-blown historical investigation, and we're going to debunk some of the biggest, most persistent myths about our past.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our investigation syllabus for today. First, we're rethinking ancient gender roles, then exposing the truth about daily life, uncovering ancient tech and marvels, and reviewing changing timelines and species before wrapping the whole thing up with the ever-changing human story. It's a packed syllabus, so let's get right to our first case file.
Section 1. Rethinking Ancient Gender Roles.
For the longest time, the classic textbook stereotype gave us a super simple, binary picture of early survival. You know the one, men went out to hunt the big game while women stayed back at camp to gather plants and watch the kids. We've all seen that exact diorama in museums, right? But the physical evidence buried in the dirt? It tells a profoundly different story. The reality is actually staggering. Up to half of early hunters were women. This huge breakthrough happened recently, in 2020, when archaeologists were digging high up in the Andes Mountains of Peru. They uncovered a 9,000-year-old grave containing a skeleton buried with an incredible kit of elite hunting gear. Stone weapon points, meat-cutting knives, the works. Because of all those weapons, experts naturally just assumed, okay, this is a male. But then they ran modern lab tests on the hidden proteins inside the teeth, and it definitively proved this elite, heavily armed hunter was actually a teenage girl. Honestly, this single discovery pushed scientists to go back and re-examine ancient graves all across the Americas, proving female hunters were completely commonplace.
And hey, it wasn't just out on the hunt. Think about the caveman artists. When we picture early humans painting those magnificent animals on cave walls, we almost always imagine male hunters documenting their successful kills. But drop this heavy statistic into your notes: 75%. A researcher named Dean Snow decided to actually study the ancient hand stencils left behind in caves across France and Spain. By measuring the length of the index finger compared to the ring finger, which typically differ between sexes, he was able to figure out who is actually leaving those handprints. To everyone's absolute shock, the measurements proved that 75% of those Stone Age cave painters were women. So, sorry to the tribal male egos out there, but women were doing the heavy lifting in the art department too.
Which brings us to another legendary myth. Back in 1878, archaeologists discovered a grave in the Swedish town of Birka, officially known as grave BJ581. It was absolutely packed with powerful weapons. We're talking swords, axes, shields, and even a tactical board game used to plan battle moves. For over a century, historians pointed to this grave and confidently called the person inside the ultimate Viking warrior and a great male leader. It was basically the textbook definition of a fearsome male commander.
But modern technology completely shattered that 100-year-old assumption. In 2017, scientists finally ran DNA tests on those bones. And the results? This high-ranking elite Viking commander was a woman. No question. This totally destroys the old idea that only men could be military leaders in Viking society. Plus, it proves that those legendary female shield maidens from the ancient Norse sagas, they weren't just folklore or mythical stories. They were real tactical experts leading forces into battle.
Moving to Section 2, the truth about daily life. Debunking misery.
Let's debunk the whole historical misery myth. You know the vibe I'm talking about? The idea that the past was just a non-stop parade of dirt, brutal survival, and incredibly early graves. Pop culture paints ancient times as so relentlessly grim. So I want to pose this common assumption to the class. Did ancient people rarely live past 30? We hear this constantly. We're told to picture life before modern medicine as being so incredibly harsh that a 35-year-old was essentially considered a frail elder at the absolute end of their lifespan.
But here's the catch. That is entirely a mathematical illusion. The myth of a 30-year average life expectancy has been utterly debunked. The reality? If you survive childhood, you are actually looking at living to about 70. In 2018, scientist Christine Cave developed a new method for studying how teeth wear down over time, looking at Old English graveyard skeletons. What she revealed is that the 30-year-old stat is just a massive math trick caused by incredibly high infant mortality rates back then. Because so many babies sadly didn't survive, it dragged the overall mathematical average way, way down. But if an ancient person made it past those early childhood sicknesses, they were highly likely to live to be 70. The ancient world was actually filled with perfectly healthy grandparents.
And what about the idea that everyone was just filthy all the time? Let's look back at the Vikings. The popular myth says they were muddy, smelly, tangled-haired barbarians. Well, the reality is quite the opposite. When experts dig up Viking burial sites, the most common items they find aren't actually weapons, they're hygiene tools. We're talking beautifully carved combs, tweezers, and even little spoons specifically used to clear out earwax. Historical records show they bathed at least once a week, which, by the way, was way more frequent than other European groups at the time, and they changed their clothes often. In fact, their meticulous hygiene routines made them so incredibly attractive to English women that the local English men literally wrote complaints about it out of sheer jealousy.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next point, the truth about ancient labor. Those massive Egyptian pyramids, they were not built by thousands of mistreated slaves hauling giant stones under the crack of a whip. Excavations at Deir el-Medina and villages near Giza revealed a whole world of bakeries and organized towns specifically for the builders, because they were highly paid, expert workers. We've actually found records showing they got sick days, received top-tier medical care, and were paid with regular rations that included beer. They even went on strike to demand better food when their pay was late. These were respected professionals, not disposable labor.
The exact same thing goes for Roman gladiators. We typically picture these carnivorous, disposable slaves fighting to the death in every single match, but a 1993 excavation of a massive gladiator graveyard in Ephesus revealed something astonishing. Chemical analysis of the bones proved that gladiators were actually strict vegetarians. They ate so many beans and carbs that the Romans literally called them barley men. Now, why do that? Because this high-carb diet built up a thick protective layer of fat under their skin to guard their vital organs against shallow sword cuts in the arena. Furthermore, their bones showed signs of incredibly expert medical care. They were highly valued, incredibly expensive athletes, not just cheap cannon fodder.
Case file number 3, Ancient Tech and Marvels, Advanced Antiquity.
Prepare to have your mind blown here, class. We are going to examine some staggering physical evidence showing that ancient humans possessed highly advanced, sophisticated technology centuries and sometimes millennia before we ever thought it was possible. Let's look at 3 artifacts that prove this. First, the Antikythera mechanism from ancient Greece. Found by sponge divers back in 1901, it honestly just looked like a crusted rock. But modern X-rays revealed over 30 interlocking metal gears working perfectly together. It was literally the world's first analog computer, used to calculate star movements and eclipses. That's tech that was completely lost for 1,000 years. Then, check out King Tut's dagger from ancient Egypt. When it was found strapped to the pharaoh's leg, historians were totally baffled because it was made of iron and Egypt only had bronze at the time. Well, in 2016, an X-ray fluorescent spectrometer proved the dagger's high nickel and cobalt matched space rocks. The Egyptians didn't smelt it. They hammered incredibly rare metal that literally fell from the sky as a meteorite. And finally, the Viking sunstones, which were long thought to be just magical myths for navigation, but we'll look at those closer in just a second.
But before we get back to the Vikings, let's talk about robotics. We almost always think programmable machines are a modern European invention, maybe starting around the 1700s. But let's jump back to 1206 AD. An inventor named Al-Jazari wrote a 13th century manuscript detailing a world of technology that was centuries ahead of its time. He engineered the world's first programmable automaton. It was a robotic musical band that sat on a boat. By moving little pegs on a rotating drum, you could actually change the robot's drum-playing rhythms. He also built complex water clocks using pistons and crankshafts that are practically identical to modern car engines. Al-Jazari was building sophisticated robots 500 years before anything even remotely similar showed up in the West.
Okay, now back to those Viking sunstones. The Old Norse sagas spoke of these magical stones used to navigate through thick ocean fog. Historians laughed it off as a fun fairy tale. Enter Iceland spar. In 2011, a piece of this exact crystal was found inside a 16th century shipwreck. It turns out Iceland spar actually polarizes light. When you rotate the crystal until the split light beams are equally bright, you can pinpoint the exact position of the sun. And the crazy part? This works even if the sun is completely hidden behind heavy clouds or even if it's dropped below the horizon. Modern experiments proved it works with incredible accuracy. That mythical Viking tech, it was totally real.
Moving on to Section 4. Changing timelines and species. Rewriting our history.
It's not just technology that's older than we thought. We also have to completely rewrite the timelines of global exploration. Old history books swore up and down that Columbus was the first European to hit the Americas in 1492. But in 1960, explorers excavated a site in Newfoundland, Canada called L'Anse aux Meadows, and what they uncovered was wild. The foundations of timber-framed sod houses and iron-making tools that perfectly, 100% matched Viking construction. This site dates all the way back to 1000 AD. It proved without a shadow of a doubt that Norse travelers, likely led by Leif Erikson, beat Columbus to North America by nearly 500 years.
And speaking of timelines, how about who actually gets to be in the Stone Age? The long-standing myth is that only humans and our extinct relatives were smart enough to use stone tools. The reality? Monkeys have literally been in their very own Stone Age for at least 3,000 years. In Brazil and Thailand, researchers found carefully selected heavy stone hammers and flat stone anvils buried deep in the dirt. But these weren't human tools. They perfectly matched the tools that modern capuchin and macaque monkeys still use today to bash open cashew nuts. By digging down layer by layer, scientists found ancient nut dust on the rocks, tracing a 3,000-year uninterrupted history of monkeys passing this tool-making knowledge down to their babies. How incredible is that?
Even evolution itself isn't just a straight line of humans getting steadily taller and smarter. Consider the Hobbit humans. Back in 2003, deep inside a cave on the Indonesian island of Flores, researchers found the skeletons of a totally distinct, miniature human species. Officially named Homo floresiensis, they stood only 3.5 feet tall and possessed brains roughly the size of a chimpanzee's. Yet, despite that small brain size, they were brilliant. They successfully crafted highly advanced stone tools and survived right alongside modern humans and Neanderthals. It throws a massive wrench into that simple, straight-path narrative of human evolution we've all been taught.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that the human family tree is vastly more complicated than we ever imagined. In 2010, scientists working in a Siberian cave found a single tiny pinky finger bone, literally no bigger than a pebble. They somehow managed to extract its DNA, fully expecting it to be either a modern human or a Neanderthal. To their absolute shock, it was neither. It belonged to a completely unknown, mysterious third group of ancient relatives that we now call the Denisovans. This proved that an entirely new species was wandering the Ice Age world, interbreeding with our ancestors and leaving genetic traits that still exist in modern human populations today, all from one tiny bone.
Which brings us to our final section, the ever-changing human story, an ongoing investigation.
If there is one thing this explainer should teach you, it's that history is not some static, boring list of facts carved into a monument. It is an active, thrilling, and ongoing scientific investigation. Every single time a new technology is invented, whether we're talking about DNA sequencing, ground-penetrating radar, or X-ray spectrometers, we have to be ready to completely rewrite the textbooks. So I want to leave the class with this final, provocative thought. If a single pinky bone can completely rewrite the human family tree, what other secrets are buried beneath our feet, just waiting to be found? Never stop questioning your textbooks. Keep that investigative curiosity alive, and remember that our past is just as mysterious, advanced, and surprising as our future. Class dismissed.